Gravity Circuit is a 2D action platformer that can best be described as if Mega Man and Mike Tyson had a baby, with Sonic the Hedgehog as the distant uncle that has spent a little too much time in prison to comfortably be around. It's a rather straightforward game, and a passion project that takes what came before and twists it around enough to feel fresh. The game does have some issues, but for what it's trying to accomplish, they're very minor in the grand scheme of things, and are prime fix this in the sequel bait. Overall though, Gravity Circuit is a tight, succinct little package that does exactly what it sets out to do, and then some. Though it's clearly inspired by classic Mega Man, to call it a clone would be a mistake. While Mega Man leaned more into the action side of action platformer, Gravity Circuit skews much more heavily towards the platformer part of action platformer. As you play, there is a notable emphasis on fluid movement through the environments. Levels are presented as a tight gauntlet of varied challenges, introducing concepts on a basic level and then really pushing the limit of the idea, sometimes from one screen to the next. The game keeps you on your toes by constantly throwing challenges at the player. When one idea has been toyed with for a bit, it tags out for another without skipping a beat. This keeps the game exciting, even on repeated playthroughs, because even when rushing through levels, there's never a dull moment. Very rarely did I feel like I was doing the same thing twice in a level. And even then, the moment passes quickly once you've adapted to the movement and can really zip around. The movement is hands down one of the game's strongest assets. The entire design philosophy could not function if the game wasn't as snappy and responsive as it is. You'll probably start the game walking everywhere, but once you get used to faster movement, you'll smash that MF run button and never let it go. Even though you're blitzing around, you are always in complete control. There is the perfect amount of momentum, and being able to start and stop on a dime means the game can demand some very precise movement, especially in boss fights. I do have one small complaint in this regard though. As you progress, you'll have the opportunity to purchase the double jump ability and slot it into one of 3 upgrade slots. I recommend doing this as soon as possible. I cannot stress enough how much having a double jump improves the game's feel, to the point where I'm baffled that it wasn't a part of the default movement kit, like the grapple hook was. Speaking of the grapple hook, it is a magnificent addition to the toolset that allows for some really tricky bits. The momentum is a bit different compared to normal movement, but once you get the hang of it and move with confidence, you'll be swinging around like Spider-Man. With how much I'm gushing about the movement, you might think that Gravity Circuit is one of those easy indie platformers that focuses more on being more a spectacle than being something engaging. It is very much a game for enthusiasts though. Most games have a difficulty curve. Gravity Circuit has a difficulty cliff when you first start to play. It felt like I died more times in the first stage I played than the rest of the game combined. That may be because I started on hard, but as an epic gamer, it is my sworn duty to play video games on their highest difficulty and bang my head against a wall until the game finally clicks and I ascend to godhood. However, I never felt frustrated. The game never feels unfair, and the checkpoints are immaculately placed such that you're always relieved to see one. But the gaps between them aren't so big that you groan if you perish after covering what looks like a huge chunk of map. I think the big issue is that for a game like this, you're going to want to play it much like you would a Mega Man title, i.e. slow, methodical, punctual. However, this isn't Mega Man, it's Gravity Circuit, and the name of the game is Speed. Success in Gravity Circuit is all about getting used to moving with speed and precision, which makes the game feel great to simply play, especially on subsequent playthroughs. The game has a high amount of replayability, owing to its dense concentration of material, easy to miss in-stage collectibles, pace of play, and high degree of player customization. Being able to equip 3 passive abilities and 4 special moves at once gives you amazing versatility that can potentially change the entire flow of play. While it's true that some upgrades and moves are stronger than others, you have enough slots where you can still have a high degree of freedom, even if some permanently remain in your loadout. I also like how bosses gain a brief period of invulnerability if you strike them too many times at once, as it prevents you from just stacking certain upgrades and abilities to burst DPS them to death, which forces you to engage with the boss and its attack patterns. The loadout system also makes it immensely satisfying to progress, as each cleared stage unlocks 2 new special moves to try out, and probably some abilities if you're rescuing the civilians. The game throws a lot of money at you, and you'll never really have to make hard choices between purchases. Even when grinding for 100%, you'll hit that goal by the end of your second playthrough, which makes experimenting with different loadouts easy and rewarding, especially since you can just swap everything out on the fly. You can go straight into New Game Plus when you beat the game, wherein you retain all your equipment and upgrades. However, I somewhat question its implementation. New Game Plus, as far as I can tell, changes absolutely nothing aside from resetting story beats. This is a little weird, since Circuit Mode is also an unlocked optional mode that does shift up the gameplay significantly, and it can be used in conjunction with New Game Plus to boot. In it, all energy upgrades become health upgrades, and you use up health to do special moves when your minuscule base level energy bar is depleted. This lets you use your special moves a lot more frequently, which can cause a cascade of absolutely annihilating the stage, if you're good enough to avoid damage. It feels great, and directly rewards the player for how good they've gotten over the course of their first playthrough. I just wish that New Game Plus shifted things around a bit, just to add that little extra oomph of replayability. As it is, the difficulty changes, while only affecting health and damage totals in the levels themselves, do make the bosses more aggressive, faster, and slightly tweak some of their moves instead of just giving them more health. This is the correct way to implement difficulty modes, but if your first playthrough was on hard, like mine, you won't be seeing anything new on New Game Plus. The game's achievements do offer special challenges for the player to do, ranging from going through the game without upgrades to avoiding all of a particular hazard on a certain level. These are indeed fun, but they exist solely for the EP. Still, I'm glad they're at least present, if the player wants to go for them to test their skill. What really confuses me is that, for a game so clearly built around replayability and speedrunning, it completely lacks any sort of meaningful scoring system. The game tracks your best time through a level, but that only incentivizes you just rushing through while ignoring all obstacles and collectibles. The game tracks performance such as civilians rescued, enemies destroyed, damage taken, etc., but it only uses these to dole out a post-level money reward, which, as I mentioned earlier, will very quickly fall off a cliff in terms of desirability. I think that tracking and displaying these metrics alongside clear time, and perhaps assigning a performance grade for all of them or just overall, would have gone a long way to increase replayability for a lot of people. After all, true epic gamers always strive to get those delicious S ranks, no matter the cost. However, I will admit such a thing may have been tricky to balance, especially since all stages are not created equal. Some are easier than others, which the game handily estimates for you on the selection screen. I like this. It allows for some stages to be designed without assuming that it could potentially be the player's first one. Of course, it very well may be, if you're a haughty fool like I am. But the fact that it warns the player definitely relaxes expectations and allows for a lot of liberties in the design process that can make some more challenging levels really shine. The most controversial design decision that anyone who has played Gravity Circuit will tell you is the fact that all enemies have contact damage. It wasn't a big deal in Mega Man, since you had a ranged weapon and maintaining proper spacing was just part of the game. However, in Gravity Circuit, your primary method of attacking is melee strikes, and the range is rather short even with an upgrade to extend the reach of your fists. Your only ranged option is attacking with your grapple hook, and while you can build it to make it pretty nutty, it's obviously not meant to be used offensively on the regular. This, combined with how fast you can move, makes it so that engaging enemies can be a rather dicey endeavor. In fact, after a while, you become tempted to just avoid their attacks and run past them. The strangest part is, based on my observations, I think this is actually the intended way to play. You begin to notice that enemies are placed very strategically in levels, and very rarely will you face more than one at a time. Your attacks are pretty simple, more tailored around doing hit and runs on bosses than actually creating a deep combat system you'll be frequently using. You don't get much from actually destroying enemies, except for energy, which you can always just refill at the checkpoints, and money, which I've mentioned becomes not very much of a reward roughly midway through the game. The game seems to want you to treat enemies as just another obstacle that's placed in a level. When you begin to view the game in this light, a lot of the design choices start to make sense, and your flow through levels becomes so much smoother when you're not stopping to smash everything to bits. Even though it works in this sense, I still feel pretty mixed on this philosophy. Like, if you want to treat enemies as obstacles, why even make them enemies in the first place? A fair amount of the powers are built around letting you just insta-kill, hyper armor through, or just flat out ignore enemies, which tend to be the most useful ones. Several powers feel weak because they're AoE attacks, but the game never throws enough enemies at you to make them ever feel worth using. Sure, they're good to have in boss fights, but it feels like a waste when you're shooting out a huge laser that covers half the screen just to hit a single guy. Perhaps the sequel can make some levels more combat focused, or perhaps include something like Hollow Knight's Colosseum of Fools that is just a combat gauntlet, so you can really flex some of these powers. However, should domesticated ant games go this route, they need to either rework the idea of contact damage or just scrap it altogether, because it's simply inexcusable for melee combat. Overall though, Gravity Circuit really impressed me. I knew it was going to be at least good, especially since I've been tracking it since it was just a twinkle in the developer's eye. I didn't expect it to be such a tight, well-crafted experience that feels more like the work of an industry veteran than that of someone who has made 0 video games before this one. I guess that's the power of passion, baby! I can't wait to see what he makes next. Even if it's just a sequel, I'm confident that it will be a solid improvement. I give Gravity Circuit an A-. A must-play if you like this type of game. It's got a few issues, but they're minor in the big picture, and none are that detrimental to the main experience. It engaged me enough to 100% the game at least, and I still sometimes want to boot it up to rock and sock those robots.